Okay, I'd like to discuss two more orders of eutherian mammals, the first being the lagomorphs. And the lagomorphs would be rabbits, hares, and an animal called the pika. And when you look at lagomorphs, they initially look a lot like rodents. In fact, a lot of students will say, oh, I thought they were just long-eared rodents, but they're not. And one of the things that distinguishes them is that they have a very unique dentition. And when we look at the dentition of the incisors, typically when you look at incisors move laterally. So again, you and I from our midline, if we move laterally, we have a first incisor and a second incisor. Well, the lagomorphs also have a first and second incisor, but it's very peculiar. The first incisor would be in the front, and then they have this little tiny peg-like incisor directly posterior, directly behind that. So that's a very unique dentition. You really don't see that in any other kind of mammal except for the lagomorphs. And again, that's something we do see in rabbits and hares and the pika. And when you compare that to, say, a rodent dentition, so I've got a beaver skull here. The beaver will only have one incisor on each side, and there is no lateral or posterior incisors. So that's one of the differences. But rodents do have chisel-like incisors, like lagomorphs. They'll have this large gap known as a diastema, and they also have similar molars and premolars that are adapted for grinding. But again, it's that second incisor that really distinguishes the lagomorphs. Okay, so again, examples would be cottontail rabbits. So there are a couple of varieties of cottontail rabbits in the ecosystem. Also hare, and so the primary hare in the ecosystem is the snowshoe hare. So in the summer, you'll see the snowshoe hare kind of dark coloration. It'll become splotchy as you move into the fall, and it actually will be pure white in the winter. And this is a major food source. Population fluctuates dramatically. Some years we'll go up there, there'll be snowshoe hares everywhere. Some years I don't see them at all. So they're a major portion of the food chain, kind of low in the food chain. And then one of my favorite animals actually in the ecosystem is the pika. It's sometimes called the rock rabbit, also called a coney. And you'll find these associated with talus fields at higher elevations. And this was recently, it's been proposed for listing on the Endangered Species Act due to global climate change, due to global warming. The problem that pikas have is that they really do not thermoregulate very well. They cannot handle hot temperatures. Even temperatures about 80 degrees, if they were subjected to that for a few hours, that's enough to cause them to overheat and die. So they require high elevations. And the problem is, every year it's getting warmer and warmer and warmer, and so their habitat is being pushed higher and higher and higher. And so as their habitat shrinks, obviously the numbers are going to shrink. Also, they're interesting because, again, they're rodent-like in appearance, but the lagomorphs do not hibernate. So one of the things that you'll see in the summers is the pikas are just busy as can be. They're constantly collecting grasses and various plants, and then they're storing those in their dens because that's what they have to feed on through the winter. They're not going to have any kind of vegetation through the winter, so they have to store enough food to get through the winter, and that's another big challenge for them. So they require a cold habitat, and they are in trouble, quite frankly, because this area is really warming up. Now, another thing I want to mention about this group, when you look at rabbits versus hares, one of the differences in distinguishing them is that when they are born, when you look at rabbits are described as being altricial. And what that means is that the young are generally born naked, blind, and helpless. And this term altricial is not reserved only for mammals. This is something we would also talk about in birds. So basically, if young are hatched or born and they're helpless, we call them altricial young, and that's a characteristic of rabbits. Hares would be the opposite of that. They produce what we call precocial young. And animals that produce precocial young, here the animals are able to walk, the eyes are open, they're going to be furred. If we were talking about birds, it would be the same situation. The eyes are open, they would be feathered, they wouldn't be ready to fly, but they certainly can walk around and fend for themselves. So again, there are some physical differences between rabbits and hares, but one of the differences is when you look at the young, whether they're altricial or precocial. And again, with the pikas, very active throughout the summer trying to store their food. Now, the last order I want to discuss are the Chiroptera, and the Chiroptera are the bats. The word is telling us that they have a hand wing. And unfortunately, bats, in terms of numbers of species, are second only to rodents. So they're one of the more abundant mammals that we find in any ecosystem, quite frankly, including the Yellowstone ecosystem, but rarely seen because they're nocturnal animals. So in North America, the suborder here would be the Microchiroptera, the so-called microbats or small bats. And these are echolocating bats. Most of them are insectivorous bats. Certainly the ones in the Yellowstone ecosystem are all insectivorous bats. And that means they also will echolocate. So they use high frequency sound, emit that in bursts when they flap their wings, and then they can pick up the rebounds from those sounds and pick those up with their ears. So really amazing flyers. I've had the good luck to be able to work with bats in the past, and they're just absolutely extraordinary. And I will show you a skeleton of a bat just so you can get a sense of the size of the wing and how the hand is adapted for that wing. Hopefully this won't reflect too much. We got a little reflection there. So again, much of the wing is composed of the hand, bones of the hand. And again, bats are rarely seen. Here's an example of what's going on as a myotis. This is a big brown bat, unfortunately dead. And again, there are a number of bats that we find in the ecosystem: big brown bat, little brown myotis, the spotted bat, which is really an interesting bat. It has white spots on its fur. The hoary bat, which is a migratory bat, which you find in the area. Red bat. Silver-haired bat, another really beautiful bat, and the Townsend big-eared bat. So the idea here is just to give you some sense that there are actually a lot of bats in the ecosystem, but about the only time you're going to see them really is at dusk. Sometimes around light fixtures, you may see them feeding on insects, but other than that, you really don't see bats for the most part.